The final session is on the status of academics in a divided higher education system. We have two very senior speakers, senior meaning senior academics, speaking on the topic, Dr. Francis Low and Professor Zaharom Nain. I believe I can start. I have about now, how many speakers, how many participants do I have? Yeah, we have about 49, I think, 50 is the kind of number that I'm looking for, but I'm going to start. And I'll introduce you first to Dr. Francis Low, who was professor of politics in University of Science Malaysia until his retirement in 2012. He is today a senior advisor in the Forum of Federations with the project Strengthening Federalism and Inclusive Governance in Myanmar. Francis was Secretary of Aliran for 20 years and President for 5 years. He still works, or rather serves Aliran in the EXCO. He is a fellow of the Asian Regional Exchange for New Alternatives, ARENA, and a founding member of the Online Global University of Sustainability. He has previously taught in Monash University, Melbourne, and had been a visiting fellow at the School of Oriental and Asian Studies in London, Kyoto University, and the University of Melbourne, and also in the Sang Kong Ho University in Seoul. We're very, very delighted that Francis would make it, and we welcome you, Francis, to the conference to speak on that subject which I mentioned earlier, which is the status of academics in a divided profession. I will introduce Zaharom when it comes to his turn. So I will let you take the mic, Francis, and proceed.
Thank you, Dr. Menon, Professor Menon. My thanks to Gerard and Zaharom in particular for persuading me to do this. Of course, I've been out of circulation for a while, so it was with some trepidation that I decided to take this on. Anyway, the topic, the division, I was mulling over this. What do I mean by division? So I asked him whether, are we talking about private versus public? Are we talking about ethnic? But I decided to do something else. So I'm going to talk about generations. So it's a division of the intellectual tradition in Malaysia according to different generations. I will start off by saying that actually the first generation was the one that took us from independence, set up University in Malaya. So I will include people like Engku Aziz, Professor Engku Aziz, Kahabado, Dato' Mokzani, KJ Ratnam, Yip Yat Hong, Hamzah Sendut, who was my vice chancellor at USM, Sharom Ahmad, who was his deputy, Shanon Ahmad, the laureate, Lim Tek Gi, Chia Boon Keng, and of course, Syed Hussein Ali, Kuke Kim, Lee Po Peng, and so on and so forth. So that's the first generation, 50s, 60s, beginning in the mid-70s, and so on and so forth. The second generation comes into the scene. We're talking about Abdul Rahman Embong, who became Persatuan Sains Sosial Malaysia president for quite a while, Rustam, who's the late Rustam, Ishak Shari, KS Jomo, Cecilia Masna Muhammad Johan, Saravana Mutu, Kuke Jin, in Penang, all these people, Sui Beng, Shamsul Barin, UKM, Zaharom, Mustafa, and I throw myself inside this group. I will include people like Yikon, but not somebody like Andrew Area. Andrew Area comes a third generation. So there's a third generation of people, with Sharifah Munira, Asmi Sharom, and then yes, another fourth generation will include people like Faisal, and so on and so forth. And quite a few people there whom I don't recognize at all, but also some people who were my PhD students, who have graduated, who are now teaching university. It would include Xiao Xi, it would include Po Hyong Hong. This would be fourth, fifth generation people. So I want to make this distinction because I think changes take place over time. Now, my generation, speaking of the second generation, we were trained overseas during a period of great turbulence in the West. And like the Western academicians who were influenced by the Black Civil Rights Movement, the anti-war peace movement, and also, the counterculture counterculture movement, Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Woodstock, and so on and so forth. They did all that soul searching. And we too, can you please go back to the first slide? This is the wrong slide. Go back to the first slide. So this is then we did our soul searching too as well. And we returned from our studies in spite of the May 13. In spite of May 13, we decided to come back, and we were very excited about becoming academicians because we did that soul searching. We tied it up with May 13. And we were not politicians, we were not business people, not religious teachers, but we thought that we had an important role to play, that we could contribute. So next slide, please. There were three things that we were very excited about. So the first aspect was this search for knowledge and truth and the pursuit of excellence. I make this distinction between knowledge and truth because truth today, after Trump and a lot of religious conservatism and all that, truth, is very, very relative these days. Knowledge for me is more identified with science. Okay, so, but I'll put a stroke there. So we're talking about search for knowledge, truth, but it always comes with excellence. We were very eager to challenge and debate the given wisdom. If you don't do this, you're not an intellectual. We love to ask why, how come, how do you explain, like Sesame Street. We wanted to distinguish between truths and half-truths. It mattered to us. You cannot be wishy-washy about this. You must know the truth. Don't dabble in half-truths. We were prepared to work hard. We were prepared to strive for excellence. Truth, knowledge, excellence must come together. The university has to be about excellence. For if excellence is not instilled in the university, if it's not pursued in the university, where else? How come? How do we instill that in any given society? And if you want excellence in administration, in industry, you must start in the university. Next slide, please. So that's the first. We were very excited about that. The second thing is about transmitting that knowledge, excellence to younger people. So we were at this stage about young, but we were also thinking about, we have to pass it down to our students. And I remember we spent long hours preparing for our lectures. We were challenged to make them excited about learning, to be creative, to be critical. And this was the atmosphere of the times. The students had just come out of 1974 student uprisings in Baling. They challenged you if you were not prepared. So it led on into the 80s. And we taught them to ask the same questions. And we were very concerned about the students comparing us to our very capable first generation senior colleagues, the Syed Hussein Alis, the Syed Hussein Alatas, the Unku Aziz and all that. We were, very, very watched by these people. Transmitting that knowledge, excellence also meant doing the necessary research and publishing. Like for other professions, however, we were also very much our own bosses. We have to be individually motivated, prioritize passing on that knowledge, no nonsense, integrity was very important, no plagiarism. And part of this endeavor to transfer that knowledge for my generation involved learning BM. We had all been English educated, so we had to sit for the SPM. I had to register myself, we had classes, tuition classes. We needed a credit, otherwise you don't get confirmed. And if you don't get confirmed, you don't get your surat tauliah. You don't get surat tauliah, you cannot get promoted. You cannot get a loan to buy a car. You cannot get a housing loan, and so on and so forth. So when we got our surat tauliah, we would put it up on our office doors. But we were very proud, but also there was a lot of sarcasm there. Next slide, please. The third thing that we're very excited about was this understanding that knowledge, excellence that we gain should be used to make the community, the nation, perhaps the world, a better place. Now, looking back at the 80s from vantage point of 2020, you might say that that's very pretentious of us. But intellectuals in the 50s and 60s had led their countries to independence. They're young, but they've done that. They fought against imperialists and succeeded. They're engaged in creating that brave new world. So my point simply is that the first and second generation, and probably some of the third generation, linked the university back to society out there. It looked beyond the ivory tower. Making the world and society a better place, we also understood would be a lifelong endeavor. You don't dabble in it for 2 years until you get your promotion. No, it's a lifelong endeavor. Put together now 1, 2, 3. 1 is that search for excellence, knowledge, truth. Number 2, transmitting that, including in Malay. And number 3, that our knowledge excellence we use to serve the world, make it a better place, or the community at least. This, for me, amounted to that wishy-washy thing, that fuzzy-wuzzy thing that I call academic culture. This is the next slide, actually, but it went missing. Can I have the next slide, please? So at that level, we're talking about 1, 2, 3, put it together. The whole day today, we have been tiptoeing around this idea of academic culture. So this is my little attempt to try to define what is it. For me, academic culture, again, involves that search for knowledge, truth, plus excellence. Put it next to transmission of that to younger people, students, as well as some of us were talking about mentor-mentee relationship. Yes, the older people have a responsibility to pass it on, some of these values, but how do you search for knowledge and also pass it to a younger generation. And the third aspect then is to believe, pretend that you actually are going to use this knowledge, excellence, to make this world a better place. And I think at an individual level, that's exactly what I tried to do for the last 40 years that I was in USM. I kept myself abreast of developments in my field. I did research with my colleagues, enjoyable research, with Zaharom, with Mustafa, with all these people. We did research together. We published books together. We shared our ideas. But I was also a very responsible teacher. I always went to classes prepared. I prepared not only for lecture, I prepared for tutorials, and I disliked marking. I'm sure you do too, but I actually enjoyed teaching that. Most fun of all was working with my PhD students who challenged me. In turn, have become, excellent academics. Finally, I've gone out the ivory tower to engage in society as a scholar activist, speaking truth, knowledge to power, as Andrew Area was talking about this morning. And this became increasingly necessary as the country went into a tailspin in so many different ways. But that's a topic for another day, okay? Next slide, please. Alas, transformation of the university system takes place. And we have been talking about this, tiptoeing around this idea again. I would pin it down to starting from the late 1980s. Why? First point, because of democratization, or sometimes we call this massification of the higher education system. The recruitment of academicians, however, did not keep up with increased numbers of universities and students. And invariably, standards declined. The pursuit of knowledge and excellence was compromised, even shunted aside. In Korea and Japan, for instance, the leveling upwards occurred when they democratized. Here we leveled downwards. Elsewhere, also in India, including in India, a two-tier system in higher education occurred. Some world-class universities are maintained, JNU, Delhi University, all the IITs, all the IIMs, Calcutta, Bombay, these are top-class universities. But they democratized education. They had a second tier, which was for the purpose of actually allowing people to be educated beyond secondary school. And they could do this both in the vernacular as well as in English. So here, however, in Malaysia, we didn't decentralize that way. We didn't allow states, we didn't allow municipalities to get involved in higher education, like in Canada or Japan. No. Here, very well, we just privatize. And quite apart from that, we believe that one size could fit all. We remain extremely centralized. Next slide, please. Why not enough academicians? In USM, so the question then is, where did they all go? I said that there were not enough of them, but actually there were some who actually left academia. In USM, out of the 20 plus Malay academicians who were with me when I joined in 1979, none were still in USM when I finally retired. Most had left 10 to 20 years ago. Some joined new public universities because this was the period of expansion from 4 universities, became 5 universities, became 20 universities, became 26 universities, public universities alone. So they were quickly promoted. They were recruited into government, departments, agencies, think tanks. Now this is also the period of the search for technocrats. Malaysia began to believe that we must have technocrats, not just producing bureaucrats, not just producing the professionals, but we needed technocrats. And a few entered politics. Among non-Malays, many started leaving due to frustration with the leadership of the universities, the lack of promotion prospects, low remuneration. So some moved to private sector, but most moved to the private universities and colleges who were recruiting people, not just as academicians, but to run, administer the universities. A third generation now has taken over. They were promoted rapidly because of the departure of 1 and 2. Compared to the earlier batches, this third generation do not have comparable research or teaching experience. They rose too fast. They had not imbibed the spirit of academia. Academic culture was still foreign to them, but they had already risen the ranks. This fuzzy-wuzzy thing, they did not quite understand it. They were mainly excited about managing the universities in accordance with the dictates of the government. And they began, as the government desired, to replace that old academic culture with a corporate, cum bureaucratic, cum Islamic culture. Actually, after listening to Xiaoxi just now, I think I must put another cum there. And that's actually a system of patronage began to seep in. Next slide, please. So that was the first point about the deterioration, transformation of the universities. It had actually expanded too fast, and we didn't have the academic staff to play a good role and maintain standards. The second was the adoption of new liberal policies. Again, Xiaoxi was talking about this, the privatization, corporatization. It led to adoption of market-driven policies to manage the universities too. Or Manan was also talking about this. And corporatization, among other things, meant the introduction of professional commercial courses, fields like management, economics, commerce, accountancy, mass communications. Actually, when I started at university, we never had mass communication in my American universities or actually in, our local universities. And suddenly they started, mass communications in USM started as a subset of the School of Social Science or School of Humanities. Our management started as a subset of the School of Social Science. And then they, came out and became full-fledged schools in their own right. And they began to become much bigger, double the size of actually School of Social Science. Because in the interim, the humanities and social sciences began to be sidelined. The departments of philosophy, history, literature, performing arts, music, fine arts struggle. They cannot find students. Lecturers also not very good because they didn't learn, the sideline. So this began to happen. And in USM, my department, I was teaching politics. The only reason why we thrived was because a lot of students thought they wanted to become politicians because that was a fast road upwards. So expansion of the universities and democratization did not lead to an uptick in creativity and critical perspective among the young. Instead, that old age search for knowledge, excellence, took a very uncritical, technocratic turn. Next slide, please. Next slide. Meanwhile, the fourth and fifth generation academicians in the public universities have adapted to this new corporate bureaucratic Islamic culture. Fifth generation, I suppose the people who have just joined the university. I need to tweak this, fine-tune the distinction between one generation and the next. The third generation, like I said, will include people like Andrew Area, people like Sharifah Munira, fourth generation will be people like Faisal Haziz, and so, or people like Yuana. Xiaoxi would be the fifth generation because she's just joined 10 years ago. They began to continue, but there's pockets of excellence in these generations. But by and large, the general trend among people of fourth, fifth generation is what I'm going to say. They began to turn to do the usual teaching. They conducted some research, often quantitative research project in a group with other colleagues. They go to meetings as required. They publish in local journals. To get promoted without hitches, they accumulate necessary points, fill up the forms properly, as Yikun was sharing with us this morning, and fill up the necessary evaluation forms, send it to your dean, and if you don't like you, like her dean didn't like Yikun, mark her down. They will really also take up petty administrative positions, teach as many courses as required, including those offered to training colleges, supervise as many postgraduate students as available. But they did not ask the why question, the how do you explain, the how come questions. Seriously, they were not looking for truth and for excellence anymore. Okay, next slide, please. This next slide. So this is my conclusion. Actually, that 1, 2, 3, search for knowledge excellence, transmission to younger people, taking it out so that you maybe can use that excellence knowledge to serve society, build a better world. That has been lost for me. There are pockets of this academic culture within the university system. I'm talking especially about the public sector, the public universities, not so much about the private, because I don't quite understand it yet. Now, I just want to say that in October 1985, a group of 200 academics met in a workshop organized by the Persatuan Sains Sosial Malaysia and University Malaya. And our guest of honor on that occasion was Professor Unku Aziz. And we discussed increasing interference by the government into universities' affairs, including the appointment of top university administrators with questionable academic credentials. And actually, Unku Aziz was very critical of what they were doing, and he was the vice chancellor. Equally critical was Datuk Mokhzani, former deputy vice chancellor of University Malaya, who addressed the gathering, explained the erosion of academic standards in this manner. He said, in the kingdom of the one-eyed king, that king would appoint a minister who is completely blind, and who in turn would appoint a deputy who is blind and one-armed. And we thought, many of us present, thought that analogy was so apt. Now, this conference I recall, because this was, at that point in time in the 80s, we were very concerned about actually the declining standards and all that in the USM. There had been a lot of controversy over the appointment of what Datuk Shanon Ahmad called Professor Kangkong. So it was very, and he had written actually a Surat Layang, which later on he admitted came from him, about, how the university appointing all these people who were actually not worthy of becoming professors. So, there were people in high places within the university with strong reputations daring to take a stand because the tradition of academic cultures, the academic culture was being broken by some of these practices. Now, the same complaints about declining standards led to a second gathering of 150 academics in USM in 1989, a few years later. But throughout this period, the late 80s, the whole process was percolating and was boiling over. This meeting was organized by the Persatuan Kaki Tangan Academic USM, and the papers presented were then compiled into a book. That book was published by the PKAP USM, and I suppose it's still available. Among people who contributed to this collection was Masna Muhammad, Halim Saleh. Now, I mentioned these two occasions because as a result of this led to the formation of a national-wide, national-level association for academicians in the country, namely our Gerak, who is organizing this conference. So that's the origin of Gerak. Gerak emerged because of all these controversies that was happening throughout the country, and we didn't have a national-level organization. Everybody was fighting their battle very quietly and not sure how to go about it, but Gerak actually provided the network that allowed us to link up with one another. So, and I recall finally a third meeting organized by PKPUSM together with Gerak, which was now duly registered. And if I'm not mistaken, Manan was our first president of Gerak. And he held the fort for a long, long time until Zaharom took over. Now, on the occasion of one of PKPUSM annual dinners, we had the late Kasim Ahmad and Professor Sharom Ahmad, both outstanding giants, intellectual giants. And both these intellectuals were again lamenting the erosion of excellence, the search for knowledge and truth being sidelined. And of course, we deliberated on what can we do about it. And in spite of our efforts, actually, we were overwhelmed by this transformation of the university system, the sidelining of that academic culture. So 25 years later, as we gather here today, which is a huge welcome because we have not really deliberated on these issues as a group for a long time, but that whole academic culture is still missing. So I end here for my presentation. Over to Professor Zaharom, who will have all the solutions.
I will now introduce Zaharom as our next speaker, speaking on the same topic about the status, who is Professor of Media and Communication Studies at the University of Nottingham in Malaysia. His research areas are in sociology of communications and the political economy of the media. Internationally, he is the recipient of 2 Fulbright scholarships or professorships as a visiting professor at the University of California, San Diego, and as a senior scholar in residence at Johnson State College, Vermont in 2009. In 1995, he was granted a Japan Society for the Promotion of Science Visiting Scholar Award and was based in Sophia University in Tokyo. He is currently on the International Advisory Board of the Bangkok-based Asia Center. I will now welcome Rom, as I often describe him, to present his paper or presentation. Rom?
Hi, good afternoon. That's a difficult act to follow. It's always a difficult act to follow when Francis is around, actually. But listening to Francis speak, it made me think of the song Circle Game, actually, the Joni Mitchell song Circle Game. It seems that we just go round and round and nothing seems to change, but that would be too depressing a picture to depict. So today, I don't have the solutions as Francis suggested. I don't think many of us do have the solutions, but I think in order to find some solutions, even if temporary, we need to essentially locate the problems. And to this afternoon and this morning, many of us have tried to locate the numerous problems there. My presentation, in my presentation, I'll try to quickly address the 2 sectors of Malaysian higher education and consider the possible ways forward. Bearing in mind, bearing in mind that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So I illustrate to some extent one act, and I think there is a need there's been a lot of talk about Act 605, but I don't think many of us are aware of what the limitations and the controls the Act actually provides. So I'm going to focus on that one Act, which we will discover can be rather silly and even funny if it wasn't so shocking for academic freedom and the development of academics, both in the, especially in the public sector. So I'll now like to put on the, okay. I start with looking very quickly at Malaysia's higher education system. Much of it has been discussed already so far, but so I won't go into greater detail. Ioana had a very nice graphic of to indicate how that education system is. Simply put, there are two sectors here, the public and private sectors. Yeah. Although within the private sector, one can also argue that there are another further, at least further two sectors there, the local universities, the local private universities, and then the overseas campuses, for example, right? So anyway, there are about 1.3 million students enrolled in these sectors, and it's virtually half and half in terms of enrollment. And during the past 15 years, there's been talk also, and there was some mention of it earlier today, about Malaysia becoming an international education hub, and the reasons effectively to attract students from around the world, but not only students, but also academic staff, scholars as well. Because we can provide a cheaper environment for many students, and the whole idea was also, as I said, to attract international campuses like Nottingham, Monash, Swinburne, Xiamen, more recently in Harriet Ward. And then also during this period, we've seen the development of local private universities like Sunway, like Taylor's. Yeah. Now, so one question that that has been alluded to, if not thoroughly discussed this afternoon, today, has been the so-called, are there really different priorities in between the two sectors? Yeah, and it is often said that they do have different agendas and different priorities. The public sector being well funded by the state, there's no need for market to market they're only competitive among the top ones, especially the top 5 research universities. So that's the argument there, that they're full of money. They get the money every year, so they don't have to worry about marketing themselves. Yeah. The private universities, on the other hand, are funded primarily by the fees collected, their intake. So this, in many ways, leads to different priorities in order to survive. Yeah. So to summarize that, the control of and dependence on the state on the one hand, and on the other, the logic and pressures of the market. Very generally speaking, yeah. So, like I said, generally speaking, because of course, with our regime's fondness for mixing politics with everything, including business, there are control overlaps, as we shall see. Just a thought first, and for us to hang on to this thought, yeah. The notion of the professor, the university professor, or the popular idea. Or the idea of a scholar, one who professes knowledge, duty to students, has a duty to students, is based on, his professorship is based on a wider personal duty to teach, research, to provide service and comment and criticize. And underlying all of this is the assumption that if he or she fails, the system then fails, yeah? So just a thought that we should hang on to the session. Now we consider the acts regulating the system. We have the professors, the idea of the professors, but then in the context of Malaysia, contemporary Malaysia, the acts regulating the system. There are at least 3 acts here. Of course, external to this, there are the numerous other acts, the Sedition Act, for example, and stuff that prevent the kind of discussions that should really take place. So there's a University and University Colleges Act for the public universities, Act in 1971, enacted in 1971, which has been discussed, especially by the round table earlier this morning, and then the Private Higher Education Institutions Act of 1996, which regulates private universities. There is one act, and this is the one that I want to talk about in greater detail. That is the Act 605, the oft-mentioned 605, the Statutory Bodies Discipline and Surcharge Act of 2000. Yeah. Act 605. Public universities were initially not subject to this act. Each university apparently had their own sort of disciplinary sort of guidelines. Yeah, but as it so happened, one university, and I will not name the university, did not have its own disciplinary rules for staff. So, and then the government then made them adhere to this act and made it so for other universities to make the whole situation even and applicable for all public universities. Yeah, to make it uniform in many ways. The act essentially was for statutory bodies, not necessarily universities at that point in time, but now universities have been virtually dragged in under the act. And the act says, right at the beginning, it says it's an act to provide for matters relating to the discipline of and the imposition of surcharge on officers of statutory bodies incorporated by federal law and for matters connected therewith. Okay, now, what's important are various sections in the act for me. Section 4.1c, for example, says, unless and to the extent that he is required or authorized to do so in the course of his duties as an officer of a statutory body, very sexist this act, the way they're written as well, an officer shall not see, the CE one, is that as an expert furnish any report or give any evidence without whether gratuitously or for reward. And of course, the caveats are put there, yet the officer would need to have prior written permission from his head of department. Yeah, so that's one major restriction. Section 18.1 then says, an officer shall not either orally or in writing or in any other manner make any public statement that is detrimental to any policy, program, or decision of the statutory body, which is the university, or the government on any issue. B, make any public statement which may embarrass or bring disrepute to the statutory body or the government. C, make any comments on the weaknesses of any policy, program, or decision of the statutory body or the government on any issue. And the person cannot also circulate such statements or comments, whether made by him or by any other person. So you now see the very real restrictions then in terms of publishing and circulating, especially in the popular media, opinions and ideas. Yeah. So as if to totally then, despite all that, as if to totally silence all concerns, section 18.2a states, an officer shall not either orally or in writing or in any other manner make any comments. This is a funny thing. I mean, you're not supposed to say nasty things about the government, but you're also not supposed to say good things of any policy, program, or decision of the statutory body or the government, not only the government, but the university as well. So in other words, among others, public university academics cannot criticize or praise the university or the government, unless, and this is where they provide the way out, unless prior written permission has been first obtained by the minister. So you get it from the minister. You cannot just essentially speak aloud, think aloud, even in many ways. So the implications for academic university relationship, it is problematic. Act 605 is problematic, which is what we were fighting for it to be abolished during the last government. Okay, some people have argued it's hardly, if any at all, if at all used. Yeah, but the fact remains that it is there, and because it is there, it is in itself a major problem for academia and academics and affects their status. So it also reinforces a problematic assumption or myth, right, that academics have a servant-master relationship with universities and, of course, the government of today, right? That compounds it, and it's further compounded by the nature of Malaysian academia, public and private. Yeah. Much of this has been discussed this whole day, but I think that some of it needs reiteration. One, we're often say that we are stuck in a legal and bureaucratic rut, yeah, both public and private universities. And that is a bit ironic in some sense, that our giving away of our rights, as it were, or not wanting to fight for our rights, because Malaysian courts in numerous instances have actually accorded academics with some autonomous status and have helped to try and remove that so-called master-servant relationship. Yeah, but sadly, many academics have not taken out the mantle to keep on fighting, to push the parameters, to really push back on all these controls, to be accorded the status of a different class. Therefore, academics need to earn it. That's and that, and I think, as we see in this from Dr. Munira's presentation and others, many don't want to do that, right? So unfortunately, the fact is many academics, though not all again, are compliant and conformist. And that's I think an indication of the wider culture in Malaysia. Yeah, the cari makan or earning a living culture that dominates in Malaysia in other occupations as well. So that's the economic control in terms of wanting to cari makan. Yeah? And then, of course, like I said, the legal and political control are the acts, like Act 605. Yeah, and there are also divergent rules for both sectors, the public and private. Yeah. Now the question is, are these divergent rules actually healthy in that sense? Yeah. We have AUKU, we have UUCA, we have and 605 for public universities, and then on the other hand, for private universities, we have the Private Higher Education Institutions Act 1976, and also the Industrial Relations Act. Yeah. And in the private sector, the contractual relationship that is there, many have seen can also be an impediment towards essentially greater autonomy and freedom and growth. Right? So finally, the way forward, what Francis says would be the answer. Well, as we can see as you can see through my list here, that we really don't, there really isn't an easy way out. Yeah. Or easy way forward. There is a need for greater understanding of the different, the structural, the liberal, neoliberal, or even beyond neoliberal. There's an argument, for example, that was written down earlier, which to some extent I can agree, that it's not so much neoliberalism here. It's neoliberalism that's regulated in many ways. What in a different context I call the oxymoron regulated deregulation in many ways. Yeah. So there are different pressures facing. What we must understand, there are different pressures facing Malaysian academia and academics in the different sectors. Yeah. And there are shared problems, sure, there are shared problems and weaknesses, but we need to be more nuanced in our assessments and our criticisms as well of both the public and private sectors. That again, there is a need for studies that are more nuanced, that look at how, for example, there have been those generations that Francis say, although I disagree with him, I don't think I was in generation 2, I'm still in generation 3, refusing to acknowledge my age, I guess. There is a need to essentially understand that despite all those controls, despite all of that, there are generations, maybe they might not be very big, generations of scholars who still fight back and who still will continue to fight back. Yeah. And yeah, the more the merrier, but even small groups can, I believe, affect change in many ways. Yeah. So there is also a need to understand that the problems and solutions come from both inside and outside academia. We often tend to look at academia in isolation from all those different factors out there. How, for example, new academics have been socialized, yeah, in so many ways before they came into higher education, right? So therefore, more holistic analysis need to be done. Of course, there are the disinterested academics, and many are the cari makan types. I think we 30 years plus of being in academia, I've seen that, and increasingly so, right? But nonetheless, that might be increasing, but nonetheless, there are those who still want to fight back. Yeah. So more than that, like the analysis, the way forward. Like the analysis done by Manon, Changda, Rossellini, and others in 2019, we heard from them, we need to disperse this knowledge. We need to share this knowledge to the wider community beyond academia. I believe many outside academia don't understand the restrictions, the controls that are there. You keep talking about AUKU, we keep talking about 605 without any clear understanding of it. And I think there needs to be more workshops, more seminars, more discussions about this kind of controls on academia, which have led in many ways and continue to lead to the rot setting in. Yeah? Why do we do this? Well, I would say it's not because we are in higher, just because we are in universities or in higher education. It's because to get back to what Francis said earlier, there must be this calling, I feel, that we must understand that universities, education in general is crucial for the betterment of society. Yeah, we need to fight racism, we need to fight sexism, and we need to do that through knowledge, to providing knowledge for society. Yeah, and therefore, because of that, we need to have in Francis' word, to excel. And that's no other way forward. Yes, there is a culture of mediocrity, and I don't think we can overcome that culture of mediocrity, because that culture is everywhere. It's not only in universities, it's everywhere in the country and everywhere around the world. Just look at Donald Trump and his trumpets. Yeah, there will always be that, I feel, unfortunately. That's my negative feeling. But then at the same time, those of us who are concerned ought to really essentially try to fight back. Yeah. And fight back means essentially to collaborate, for example, to collaborate with NGOs, to collaborate with the wider society, not just remain within universities and hope that things will change out there, yeah, and pontificate about that. We need to collaborate for change and for reform. Yeah, we must, as I end by saying, we must speak out. I'd like to end with a little anecdote here. Many years ago, at one social science meeting, a young lecturer then came up to me and says, "Yeah, we need to, but we might lose our job. We might not be promoted." I told her, I can't understand you. You've got a bloody PhD, yeah. If you can't get a job, you're applied PhD, then what's the worth of that PhD? You know what I mean? To fear that you can't get a job despite all that academic qualifications, that shows that you don't have much faith in yourself, right? And I think this excuse about not getting a job if you fight back, I think is a silly excuse, and I totally don't agree with it. And on that note, I think I better shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram, for that. It ends today's discussions.